A mysterious dog storms into a hospital in the dead of night. What it does next with a sleeping baby will leave everyone breathless. The hospital, usually so predictable and orderly, seemed shrouded in an unsettling stillness that night. The rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the occasional soft footsteps of medical staff were the only sounds breaking the silence, as if the very air had paused, holding its breath in anticipation. Evelyn, the head nurse, moved through the pale, sterile glow of the corridor lights, her steps precise and confident, her eyes scanning each patient with the practiced calm of someone who had long since adapted to the monotony of life within hospital walls. But tonight, something felt different. A subtle but persistent unease had crept into Evelyn's mind, a whisper of intuition she couldn't quite name. The silence felt charged, heavy with an unspoken expectation. Her instincts, honed over years of managing crises, told her something was coming. And then it did. A faint scratch at the door made her stop abruptly. The sound, so out of place, immediately seized her attention. When she turned toward it, her gaze landed on the imposing figure of a dog, Max. He stood at the hospital entrance, his golden coat gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, his posture regal yet calm. Something about his eyes held Evelyn captive, a depth, an intensity that made her linger a moment longer than she should have. Max wasn't just any dog. His dark, penetrating eyes seemed to see through the walls, through the people, even through her. A shiver ran down Evelyn's spine as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Max remained motionless, like he belonged there, his presence too deliberate to be random. In that moment, the hospital, a place of unyielding routines and rigid protocols, felt frozen in time. The silence, once comforting, now carried the weight of an impending revelation. Evelyn's breath hitched. She knew something significant was about to unfold. Max stepped inside with the confidence of someone who had always known this was where he was meant to be. His paws made barely a sound on the polished floor, but his presence was impossible to ignore. The soft glow of the hallway reflected off his coat as his sharp eyes swept the surroundings, searching for something or someone. Evelyn's stomach tightened. A practical woman by nature, she had always relied on logic and training. But there was an inexplicable strangeness to this moment. Dogs didn't just wander into hospitals without cause. Max carried himself differently, as though he understood that his arrival meant more than a simple breach of protocol. As he moved purposefully toward the pediatric ward, the sound of his paws on the floor reverberated, each step heightening the tension. Evelyn hesitated, torn between her duty to intervene and an instinctual urge to simply watch. The weight of the moment kept her rooted in place, a silent observer to something far beyond her comprehension. The other staff seemed equally paralyzed. Mason, the burly nurse known for his calm in the face of chaos, glanced at Evelyn, waiting for her directive. None came. Zoe, the eager young resident with a passion for solving mysteries, looked on with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Fear of the unknown lingered in her wide eyes. Max stopped at the doorway of Eli's room. The toddler, barely 2 years old and more familiar with the beeps of medical machines than the laughter of home, slept peacefully inside. The weight of the moment jolted Evelyn into action. She took 2 quick steps, ready to intervene. But she froze again. Max had paused just outside the door, lifting his head and sniffing the air with a deliberate gentleness that felt almost ceremonial. His body remained perfectly still, but his eyes burned with an unshakable focus. The hallway buzzed with an unspoken tension. Everyone watched, caught in a shared sense of expectancy. Something was about to happen. Max didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on the door to Eli's room, and for a fleeting moment, Evelyn had the strange notion that the dog was waiting. But waiting for what? The atmosphere grew heavier, as though the very air itself was uncertain, suspended in some invisible balance. A knot tightened in Evelyn's chest. Her instincts urged her to act, yet she felt restrained by something larger, something intangible. Every nerve in her body bristled, her mind racing even as her feet refused to move. The hospital, once a sanctuary of predictability, had become the stage for an unknown force. Max remained still, a silent sentinel, as the night edged toward an inevitable shift. Max didn't seem like just a lost animal wandering into their lives. He carried an aura, a presence far greater than anything rational could explain. The dog's eyes glowed with an intensity Evelyn had never encountered before. It wasn't just a gleam. It was profound, almost human, filled with an ancient wisdom. A lump rose in her throat. Those eyes weren't merely observing. They were seeing through her, through everyone present, as if Max could unravel their deepest secrets. It felt like he was peering into the darkest corners of her soul, unearthing fears and anxieties even Evelyn wasn't ready to confront. Mason, the nurse whose usual demeanor exuded confidence, took a hesitant step forward. For the first time, his composure faltered. He muttered something about protocol, but his voice lacked its usual assuredness. Evelyn barely registered his words. Her entire focus was locked on Max, who stood still, yet radiated an undeniable force that demanded attention. Then, as if guided by some unseen will, Max moved. The air seemed to shift around him, heavy with an invisible current that followed his every step. He walked with purpose, as though he belonged there, as though he had been summoned. When he reached the door, he paused, pressing his nose gently against it. Evelyn held her breath. Time itself seemed to halt as every eye in the room fixed on the strange dog. On the other side of the door came the soft, rhythmic breathing of Eli. The sound was barely audible but carried an almost sacred weight in the stillness. Max nudged the door open with his snout, and it creaked slowly, revealing the room beyond. The glow of medical monitors painted the walls in faint, flickering light. Inside, Eli lay in his crib, peaceful, tiny under a baby blue blanket. The child's steady breathing was the only sign of life in the room. Max padded softly to the crib, his movements now calm and deliberate. It was as though he had reached the destination he'd been searching for. Evelyn watched from the doorway, emotions crashing over her in waves. Part of her was terrified. A large dog so close to such a fragile child was a dangerous combination. Yet another part of her, one she wasn't ready to admit aloud, trusted Max. There was something in his presence that felt protective, almost sacred, as if he were there for a reason beyond anyone's understanding. Max leaned closer, his head lowering until it was level with Eli's small, sleeping form. The room held its collective breath. Mason and Zoe, the other nurse who had joined them, stood frozen, their expressions filled with equal parts fear and awe. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Then something happened. Eli, who had been sound asleep, stirred. His tiny hands, limp and motionless moments before, twitched. His eyes, closed tightly for what felt like days, fluttered open. Slowly, hesitantly, Eli's unfocused gaze locked onto Max. The dog, still as a sentinel, gazed back. In that instant, it was as if some unspoken connection was formed between them, one that defied logic or explanation. Evelyn felt her throat tighten, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't understand. Eli, who so rarely showed signs of life beyond his soft breathing, seemed to be waking, not because of medicine or machines, but because of something far greater, something mysterious. The silence in the room was almost deafening, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Eli blinked again, his tiny eyes wide and uncomprehending, yet undeniably fixed on Max. The dog didn't move, his steady breath the only sign of life in his imposing figure. But his stillness was not absence. It was presence, a grounding force that seemed to hold the entire room together. Evelyn, compelled by something she couldn't name, stepped cautiously into the room. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing with anticipation and dread. Behind her, Mason and Zoe exchanged quick glances, as if seeking validation that they weren't imagining the scene before them. The hospital seemed to fall away, its hum of machines and distant voices replaced by an almost reverent stillness. The world shrank to the small room and the connection unfolding within it. And then Eli moved again. His tiny hand, trembling and hesitant, lifted from where it rested by his side. It rose slowly, as though guided by a force unseen, until it reached Max's snout. His fingers, impossibly small, brushed against the dog's fur, soft and warm beneath his touch. The room seemed to exhale all at once. Such a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of something profound, something almost divine. Max responded with a gentle inclination of his head, his eyes briefly closing as a deep, contented sigh escaped him. It was not merely the sigh of a dog, it felt like an acknowledgement, a silent reply to Eli's touch. Time stood still in that room, every heartbeat, every breath attuned to the quiet miracle playing out before them. It was as if they were recognizing one another, not as dog and child, but as two souls that had somehow met on a higher plane. Evelyn felt a surge of emotion welling up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She couldn't explain it, but there was an undeniable truth before her. Max wasn't there by coincidence. After Eli's brief touch, Max began to circle the crib with deliberate steps, almost like he was performing a quiet, sacred ritual. His eyes never left the baby, and the once tense air in the room seemed to shift, softening into a profound stillness. Evelyn watched, caught between awe and a creeping sense of unease. She had never seen anything like this. Max appeared to be protecting Eli, almost like a guardian assigned to this task long ago. But why? And how did he know exactly where to be, whom to watch over? Eli, now fully awake, followed Max's movements with wide, curious eyes, as though the dog were the only thing in the world that mattered. What struck Evelyn most deeply was the baby's unusual serenity. Eli, who would typically stir at the slightest sound or movement, seemed entirely at peace. Then, Max did something no one could have anticipated. He stopped, looked directly at Evelyn with an expression startlingly perceptive, and gently rested one paw on the crib's edge. It felt like a signal, deliberate and meaningful. A chill raced down Evelyn's spine. The dog seemed to be trying to convey something urgent, something that words could never capture. Evelyn hesitated before stepping closer to the crib, her pulse quickening. Max's soft yet weighted gesture seemed to carry a significance she couldn't yet grasp. As she drew near, their gazes locked, and for a fleeting moment, Evelyn swore the dog was attempting to communicate in a way that transcended human understanding. Taking a steadying breath, she reached out and stroked Max's head. To her surprise, he responded with a subtle shift, almost as if he understood her touch was an acknowledgement, a sign of trust. Max withdrew his paw and stepped aside, leaving space for Evelyn to approach Eli. As Evelyn leaned over the crib, an inexplicable sensation washed over her. The room seemed heavier, infused with an unspoken meaning. Something felt off, or perhaps profoundly right, in a way she couldn't define. Eli's breathing was calm, but his wide-open eyes unnerved her. In those innocent eyes she saw something far beyond his age, a depth and awareness that didn't belong to a child. It was as if he understood everything happening around him: Max's presence, his mother's confusion, and even what was yet to come. Time seemed to stand still in the small room. Evelyn was torn between awe and a quiet dread she couldn't shake. Max, now observing from a few steps away, seemed content, as though he had fulfilled some unseen duty. Yet the tension in the air hinted at something unfinished, a silent question lingering between them. What more lay hidden behind Eli's mysterious gaze? Evelyn knew the answer was near, and when it came, it would change everything. The silence was broken by an unexpected sound, a deep, thoughtful sigh from Mason, the young doctor. Until now, he had remained on the room's edge, observing with a skeptical eye. But now something in the scene disturbed him. His gaze, which had been fixed on charts and medical data, was now riveted on Eli. A persistent thought gnawed at his mind. Whatever was unfolding here defied medical explanation. Mason, a man who had always trusted in science, now found himself confronted with something beyond reason. Max, the majestic dog, wasn't merely a random visitor. There was an undeniable connection between him and the strange calm surrounding Eli, and that realization unsettled Mason deeply. Without thinking, he moved closer to the crib. His hands trembled slightly as he reached out to check the baby's pulse, a futile gesture, since the baby's steady breathing was evident. But Mason needed the distraction, something to ground him against the rising unease threatening to overwhelm him. When Mason's fingers brushed against Eli's warm skin, a shiver coursed through him. The baby's breathing was soft, his tiny body radiating heat. But there was something else, a surge of energy Mason had never experienced before. He glanced at Evelyn, searching her face for any sign she felt it too. To his astonishment, her wide eyes mirrored his own sense of awe. Something far greater than them, something beyond explanation, was unfolding in that moment. Suddenly, Max, the family's dog, lifted his head and approached Mason with an air of purpose. Though Mason had always been a staunch believer in the tangible and the rational, the look in Max's eyes struck him like a bolt of intuition. It was as if the dog knew exactly what was happening, or what was about to happen. Mason instinctively stepped back, his heart pounding as he tried to comprehend the strange scene before him. Control slipped from his grasp. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably, charged with an almost electric tension. The air felt heavy with a mix of anticipation and unease, wrapping everyone in its grip. Evelyn, Mason, and Zoe, Eli's nurse, stood frozen in silent vigilance. Their breathing seemed to sync with the baby's gentle rhythm, each beat intensifying the moment. Max, adopting a protective stance, began pacing slow, deliberate circles around Eli's crib. His movement seemed almost ritualistic, as if tracing an invisible boundary of protection. Occasionally, he would pause, turning his piercing gaze toward the room's occupants with an intensity that defied logic, as though he were trying to convey a truth beyond words. Zoe, ever the pragmatic caregiver, observed Max with a mix of skepticism and wonder. Her faith in evidence and science wavered as the dog's actions nudged her toward the edge of belief in something inexplicable. It was unsettling, but oddly captivating. She couldn't shake the sense that she stood on the cusp of something profound, something that threatened to upend her understanding of reality. Meanwhile, Evelyn's focus remained on Eli. The baby's face glowed with an almost otherworldly calm, his expression radiating peace. His unblinking eyes stared at the ceiling as though attuned to something beyond their comprehension, as if an invisible force was comforting him. Then, Max stopped abruptly in front of the crib. A low, melodic bark escaped his throat, resonating with a strange and almost spiritual quality. It wasn't an urgent sound, but one that demanded attention, pulling everyone deeper into the room's unspoken mystery. Evelyn, Mason, and Zoe exchanged perplexed glances, their minds racing. What was Max trying to communicate? Just as suddenly as he began, Max fell silent, and a profound stillness descended over the room. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath. Then, as though guided by some unseen connection, Eli stretched out his tiny hand toward Max. The gesture was deliberate, almost reverent, as if the dog were a bridge to a world the baby was only beginning to grasp. The room seemed to hold its breath alongside the adults, every heart synchronized in the moment. What unfolded next would shift their perception of reality forever. Max, enigmatic as ever, appeared to be the key to unraveling the mystery that pulsed in the space between them. His presence anchored the charged atmosphere, turning Eli's nursery into a stage for an extraordinary revelation. Evelyn, Mason, and Zoe watched with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Max remained motionless, his focus unwavering on the crib, his tail swaying faintly, as though in tune with an internal rhythm only he could perceive. Zoe, grappling with a whirlpool of questions, finally stepped closer. Her footsteps were slow and deliberate, as if she feared disrupting the delicate balance of the moment. But when she drew near, she stopped dead in her tracks. Max had lain down beside the crib, his body relaxed, yet alert. His steady gaze never wavered from Eli, and a profound sense of tranquility seemed to radiate from him, enveloping the room. Zoe's analytical mind battled to rationalize what she was witnessing, but the scene defied logic. No scientific framework could contain the gravity of this moment. Evelyn, on the other hand, felt her heart swell with empathy. She had always been the emotional grounding for those around her, but this was unlike anything she had ever faced. Something deeply transformative was happening, not just in the room, but within each of them. It was as if they were all participants in an unseen symphony, with Max at its center, guiding them toward an understanding they couldn't yet articulate. Observing the quiet connection between Max and Eli, Evelyn felt a whirlwind of emotions. Compassion, hope, and an intangible sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. Mason, the most skeptical of the group, stood in utter bewilderment, his gaze darting between the dog and the baby, searching for any sign of danger. Yet, what he witnessed wasn't threatening. It was a connection that seemed to transcend conventional understanding, challenging the steadfast logic he had always relied upon as a doctor. Then, something remarkable happened. Max rose with sudden energy and began circling the room with a distinct purpose. He stopped abruptly in front of Evelyn and, with a gentle movement, brushed his muzzle against her face. The touch was soft, almost reverent, as though the dog was trying to convey a silent message. Evelyn froze, her eyes welling with tears as realization dawned. The bond between Max and Eli was no mere interaction. It was a profound demonstration of how one being could profoundly impact another, defying all logical explanations. Max, in his own way, seemed to be revealing the significance of his connection with the baby, a connection that carried an almost sacred weight. The room fell into a hushed stillness, an air of reverence enveloping Evelyn, Mason, and Zoe. They found themselves in deep contemplation, their beliefs and emotions stretched beyond familiar boundaries. What they were witnessing defied any scientific or emotional framework they knew, and the transformation occurring in Eli's room was only beginning to unfold. As Max continued his quiet vigil beside Eli's crib, the atmosphere in the room was one of both curiosity and apprehension. Evelyn, Mason, and Zoe remained tense, each wrestling with the implications of Max's behavior. As the night wore on, the room grew quieter, the stillness contrasting with the tension hovering in the air. What had initially seemed like Max's instinctive reactions now carried a sense of deliberate intent. Determined to make sense of what she was witnessing, Evelyn turned to Eli's medical records, her eyes scanning the computer screen. Yet her mind wandered, grappling with the feeling that what was happening was more than mere coincidence. Mason, ever the analytical observer, began documenting the scene, taking photographs and jotting notes. But with each snapshot, he felt further from uncovering the truth, as though logic was slipping further from his grasp. The experience felt deeply human, yet unexplainable, eluding even his most reasoned deductions. Zoe, with her open and curious mind, began entertaining the possibility that they were witnessing something beyond conventional science. Her gaze fixed on Max, she felt both wonder and awe, as though standing on the precipice of a revelation that could redefine the limits of what they thought was possible. The room's energy shifted as Max approached the crib with an almost sacred caution. He lay down near Eli, resting his head gently beside the baby. The sight was so moving that Evelyn, Mason, and Zoe found themselves immersed in the moment, sensing an almost tangible change in the room's energy. Max emanated a sense of calm and protection that seemed to envelop everyone present. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound emerged from the crib, drawing Evelyn's attention. Leaning in gently, she noticed a subtle vibration that seemed to synchronize with Eli's heartbeat. It was as though Max's presence was orchestrating a harmony that only he and the baby could fully comprehend. As the connection between Max and Eli deepened, something shifted within Evelyn. A newfound clarity began to take hold, a recognition of the profound impact of love, presence, and connection, no matter how unexplainable it might seem. The emotional weight of the moment compelled her to reevaluate what truly mattered in life. Mason, finally surrendering to the inexplicable moment before him, found himself reevaluating his beliefs. The realization dawned on him that the world was far more intricate than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. His expression, a mix of bewilderment and awe, revealed a man on the brink of a deeper understanding. Zoe, tears glistening in her eyes, was entirely captivated. What once appeared to her as a scientific puzzle had transformed into a living testament to the profound power of emotional bonds and the impact one being could have on another. She felt like a witness to something extraordinary, something that defied the boundaries of logic. As the night deepened, Max's presence and his interaction with Eli unfolded a narrative of connection and discovery, one poised to challenge the comprehension of everyone in the room. The quiet of the hospital at night was almost tangible. The gentle hum of monitors and the distant echo of footsteps in the hallway created a backdrop of calm, but the stillness carried a fragile tension. That silence was soon disrupted. Max, a striking golden retriever, stepped into the room with a curious yet purposeful air. His movements were deliberate, as though mindful of preserving the serenity that surrounded him. The infant, Eli, lay peacefully in his crib, his tiny breaths steady and rhythmic. Max approached with measured steps, his every move speaking of an almost reverent care for the baby. Zoe, one of the nurses, started forward, her instincts urging her to act, though her mind raced to decode the intent of this unexpected visitor. She exchanged a worried glance with Mason, a nursing assistant whose skepticism was evident in his furrowed brow. Max lay down beside Eli's crib, his head resting gently on the floor in an act of quiet guardianship. His deep, penetrating eyes stayed fixed on the baby, and the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. There was something almost sacred in the air, a current of anticipation that seemed to touch everyone present. Evelyn, moved by an unshakable curiosity, stepped closer. The soft hospital lighting reflected off Max's expressive eyes, revealing a depth of emotion that left her breathless. In that moment, he seemed like more than just a dog. He was a presence, carrying an aura that transcended the ordinary. As time passed, Evelyn noticed a gradual shift in the room. The unease that had shadowed their faces softened, replaced by a surprising sense of calm. Even the baby seemed to relax more deeply in his sleep. Mason, now visibly intrigued, raised his camera, capturing the unfolding scene frame by frame. Each click documented more than the visible. It preserved the profound, emotional transformation taking place in the room. Zoe, who had initially been wary, found herself overwhelmed by admiration and wonder. She watched as Max seemed to embody a perfect balance of care and protection. His actions resonated with a universal truth about love and connection, something deeply moving that went beyond words. Max's presence invited introspection in everyone. Evelyn, Mason, and Zoe each began to recognize that this was no ordinary display of animal behavior. It was an expression of something deeper, a connection that was both primal and profound. The trio became increasingly aware that Max's actions carried a lesson. His quiet devotion, his intuitive understanding of the moment, and the peace he brought were tangible reminders of the power of empathy and protection. Max seemed to embody an essential truth about kindness, one that resonated deeply with each of them. The room, once filled with skepticism, now brimmed with a quiet reverence. As they reflected, it became clear that Max's impact reached beyond the physical. He challenged their perceptions, urging them to embrace a deeper understanding of connection and compassion. Together, they stood in awe of the golden retriever who, without a word, had shown them the profound simplicity of love and its ability to transform a moment, and perhaps even a life. What part of this story moved you the most? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. And if you know someone who would be touched by this heartwarming tale, share it with them. Together, we can spread stories that inspire and uplift. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Stories that will warm your heart and make you reflect on life.